South Asia, human geography. We're discussing briefly the history of South Asia in this video. Okay, let's get started. So we're taking a look at the South Asia timeline. I want just to highlight a couple of concepts. Whoa, what was this? Okay, let's try that again. Boom. Okay, taking a look at the timeline for South Asia. I want to highlight a couple concepts with you guys. The first one is this. Talking about or just highlighting this just the way that we've done before, the Indus River Valley civilization. So let's talk about first one of the culture hearths. Whenever we go to a different part of the world, I try to touch base on a culture hearth, or whenever we go to a part of the world that has one of the world's ancient civilizations that influence other civilizations, those are what we call culture hearths. So I do want to first start off by discussing the South Asia culture hearth, or the Indus River Valley culture hearth. It was between 3000 to 1500 BCE. This was a period of time where the Indus River Valley civilization, which is located right here on the Indus River Valley, it was one of the world's oldest civilizations. It appears just from archaeological evidence that it was also the largest of the ancient culture hearths population-wise. It's believed that in one of the cities of the Indus River Valley civilization that there were over 5 million citizens, which is an incredible amount of people, especially for that point in time. They're more than that's already just that city, 5 million people. That's more people than we have in any city in Louisiana. It's probably approximately the same population size as we have of the state of Louisiana. I want to say state of Louisiana, last I checked, was right at 4.9 million people as of the last census. So we're talking about 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. This is a culture hearth, that ancient civilization that had a population size as far as raw numbers of people the same as we do today in the state of Louisiana. Tremendous accomplishment. So another thing I would like to highlight, or another point I would like to highlight with you guys that ties into concepts that we've discussed in previous videos, is that around between 2000 to 1400 BCE, we see that the Arian migrations to this area occur. The Aryans came from Central Europe. They migrated down into South Asia. They were nomadic warriors. They brought their ways of life. Specifically, we see one part of their culture that has an effect on South Asia today, which is the caste system, which we went into a little bit of detail discussing in some of the other videos. 1498, we start seeing the first European settlements. I want to say they were from Portugal into South Asia. This is a big one. 1600, Queen Elizabeth I grants the charter to the East India Company, the British East India Company, to trade with Asia, to trade with South Asia, which was at that time called the East Indies. This will start the trend of what we've seen, which occurs with colonization. We've seen this all throughout the year when we discuss European colonization of the ancient world, or what we would call the mid, let's say from the 1400s to about the early 20th century. Okay, at first it starts slowly, and then eventually what you'll see, we saw this in the Americas, saw this in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Eventually the indigenous people succumb to the will of the Europeans because of their superior technology. Exact same thing occurred here in South Asia. 1600s, we start seeing really enforced British, Europeans led by the British. They're trading, and that's generally how to start with trading. And generally you see over the next 200 years or the next 150 years, European power, specifically Great Britain, which you see in this, which is illustrated in this picture. Early British traders, the British redcoats trading with citizens of South Asia. So between 1600 and 1757, Great Britain comes to control pretty much the majority or all of South Asia. All of this area eventually becomes under the control of Great Britain. Most scholars, they say that the original, the date they give as far as when South Asia becomes a colony of the British is right in 1757, when during the Indian invasion at the Battle of Plessy, the Indians who rebelled against the growing influence of Great Britain in their region. They were crushed by an army by the British East India Company. So this is when we see Great Britain go from economic control to full political control of the area. So within 150 years, similar concepts to what we've seen when we studied other regions with European colonization. So moving forward, talk about this. Of course, the Indian Rebellion War against Great Britain was unsuccessful. Around 1885, we see the Indian National Congress is founded. The Indian National Congress is important. I want you guys to make sure you understand this. This was founded by citizens, native people of India. They founded this in hopes of petitioning the British government to give better rights to the indigenous people of India. So Indians found that they became second-class citizens in their own country. So the goal of the Indian National Congress in 1885 was to petition the country that they had conquered them, Great Britain, to give the native people of India more rights and to have them not be treated as second-class citizens in their own country. And this we see rebellions, or you'll see varying degrees of success with this. But what I do want to highlight here is that between the years of 1920 to 1922, Indian citizen. At one point in time, he was a lawyer, came from a wealthy or a well-to-do family. Mahatma Gandhi, he had his first nonviolent cooperation movement, or his first non-cooperation movement, which was nonviolent resistance against what felt was against oppression. And so political oppression. So this was the first time that Gandhi used it. It was based off the teachings of leaders throughout time, especially, of course, one of those was Jesus Christ. Gandhi, the first one, this was why he was in South Africa, a lawyer in South Africa, fighting to improve the rights of Indians in South Africa, which during that time was also, we discussed apartheid and other segregation laws that affected minorities or affected non-Europeans in South Africa. So Gandhi started in South Africa with these non-cooperation movements. So between 1920, and this is a picture of him as an older gentleman, between 1920s, from 1920s to 1946, Gandhi is an extremely large political figure in India. In India, even today, I guess the closest, it's my approximation that the closest person we would have is like Martin Luther King, but his influence, because it goes into more of a political realm, we do not have an opportunity to touch on in this class, but definitely more of a political realm with the members of his family, that Gandhi's influence is probably larger than Martin Luther King's here. That's hard to believe because Martin Luther King, pretty much everyone in America knows who Martin Luther King is, their monuments, it's everything. But if, believe it or not, Gandhi's influence in India is larger than what we would have for Martin Luther King here. I guess if you can, a good way to say it would be if you can combine Martin Luther King and George Washington. I think that would be a good approximation of how big or how influential Mahatma Gandhi is to this day to the people of India. So let's go ahead. So 1920s to 1946, Gandhi fights for political and economic freedom from England through nonviolent disobedience. And of course, we talk about nonviolent civil disobedience. These were some of the tactics that were adopted by Martin Luther King some 10 years later in the United States of America during the Civil Rights Movement. Also later on by Cesar Chavez and adopted by oppressed people all over the world. Some of their teachings, Jesus Christ, other people throughout history, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, all this. So you see a bridging of concepts and ideals. So what this picture represents is that in Gandhi and the members of the India and the people of India were eventually successful in 1947. They were granted Great Britain granted the British Parliament passed the Indian Independence Act, but they did it and they created two separate countries. This country they created the country of India, which we've discussed is primarily Hindu, and the country of Pakistan, which is in northwestern, would have been considered the northwestern part of the territory of India. And the people here were predominantly Muslim, or the people in Pakistan are predominantly Muslim. So we have two separate countries forming out of the British territory, the former British territory in South Asia, the country that we now call India, and Pakistan. In 1971, part of Pakistan breaks away and calls itself Bangladesh. Becomes the new independent country of Bangladesh. India goes to war with Bangladesh to help the Bangladeshi cause. So what we see now then is three separate countries from the original, or that were once a part of the British colony in South Asia. Going to India today. India today is the world's most populated democracy. It has a parliament, a congress, so it's the largest as far as population-wise. Pakistan today is an Islamic republic, which means that it is a republic, a government based on Islam, based on Islamic beliefs. Bangladesh has been a republic under military rule. And Kashmir is the fight between India and Pakistan over this area, the area of Kashmir. Both religious and political. It's in India. It's believed to be the conflict between India and Pakistan, between these two countries. It's believed by a lot of people in the world because both of these countries have access to nuclear weapons. They have a nuclear arsenal. It is believed by most, or a lot of analysts, that this is the place in the world that is most likely to have a nuclear attack. One country perpetuating a nuclear attack on another. It almost occurred once in the 1970s. It's possible to happen again because, one, these countries, nuclear weapons, also religious, I don't want to say extremism, but both countries are strongly aligned with their religious beliefs, and the government and religion are very intertwined in both countries. Remember, highlight the answers to your homework learning targets. Answer all your questions in bold lettering. Have a good day. See you in class. The end.